What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Ask Me Anything. If you're new here, this is just a place to ask questions, and I do my best to answer them. I am not an expert. I do my best. I offer, and take what sticks and leave what doesn't. And I open this to the community as well. So I'm not the only one answering. Feel free to leave comments, send me an email. I'll include it in any of the next Ask Me Anything recordings and whatnot. Yeah, so welcome. Today, there is a pretty good question that I had that came up recently. So I am skipping around a little bit here, but um, yeah, I'll just read it. I'm interested in your background as a teacher. What has been difficult letting go of as you transition to self-directed education? What secrets do teachers hold that still apply in self-directed education? Yeah, I think this is really applicable, and I do feel like I have that very specific role as a teacher. And I think there are some pretty good takeaways for unschooling parents, self-directed education parents, et cetera, life learners, um, that they wouldn't know had they not been teachers. So I'll try my best to share those. I'll start with my story a bit because it will kind of bring us up to speed on why I'm even here. And I don't know, I love stories. And that, yeah, I just guess in general, stories help me see a broader lens of the world. So hopefully my story adds something to your, maybe gives you some insights or whatever. Okay, so I started in college. I studied abroad in Samoa. I was a cultural anthropologist at that time. And I was like, I don't know, cultural anthropology. I'm studying culture. Let me go to the craziest place ever that I could go to. So I went to Samoa and I learned the language, but not from the busy working parents. I learned the language from the young people who were playful and curious and fun. And it was at that point that I recognized that I wanted to do something in education. Maybe I wanted to be an educator. I wanted to work with kids because they kind of still had that bright and shining light. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of educators kind of had that moment where they were like, wow, kids, like they're so cool, they're alive in ways that many adults aren't, or seemingly not. Um, okay, so after fast forward out of college, I became a preschool teacher for a while. I was actually teaching toddlers, which was something else. Imagine having two teachers with 10 toddlers in a room and taking care of them, and teaching them. Yeah, it was hard. Um, and then I went abroad to Japan to teach English to Japanese students, and I was working with elementary and middle grade students, and that was a wild experience. I love Japan. I met my wife there. Um, yeah, and then just reflecting on the different educational systems, what I knew from my background as a student, right? And I kind of always had this like I don't know, so like a special place in my heart for teachers. I just thought they had that really cool role um, to be able to, pique the interest of the classroom, or at least some of the children in the classroom. So. Yeah, just seeing the differences between Japan and the US opened my eyes a bit. There were like ups and downs. There were things that the US was getting wrong, things that I thought that Japan was getting wrong. And then after 2 years, I came back stateside with my wife. And then went back to being a preschool teacher and then flipped over into being an administrator. And this was at all of my preschool experience was at a progressive preschool. And I say progressive because the curriculum itself was based on the the young people in the classroom, it was based on their interests. So that's what the teachers decided to make for the next week, like based on their interests. So if it was dinosaurs or if it was space or, what have you. Um, I saw ways that this worked out really well. And then kind of depending on the teacher, sometimes it really didn't. Um, but really progressive idea that you would use the children's interest as like the jumping off point for teaching everyone. Now, I am very specifically using the word progressive here because a progressive school, and I'll share this article. This article is by Alexander Khost, and is called Self-Directed Education as a Political Act. And this is on ASDE's website, self-directed.org. But just, I always go back to this article, and man, I really should read it again. But I love, love, love the graphic, and it's fear-based models versus trust-based models. And it like really sets a very clear line, like a really clear delineation. If you think of most of the schools that we know, um, from military schools, that sounds really, fear-based, right? And it's Alexander Coast is saying that's a conservative, right? Then there's preparatory schools, charter schools, public schools, and they're still in the like kind of authoritarian area. Then Montessori schools sounds progressive, right? But even those are considered moderate in this graphic. Waldorf schools, very progressive. Yeah, progressive schools, democratic schools. Now we're getting into permissiveness and liberalism. However, on this line here of all the schools that sound whether really intense and strict to like, wow, super progressive, they're fear-based models. And to kind of sum it up in the way that I understand, there is still an expectation that things are done. Like in democratic schools, not democratic free schools, in a democratic school, the young people get to vote on which curriculum they're going to use or when they're going to do it, but not like it's like out of a choice, out of a choice of three. So it's still really controlled. They get to steer the wheel a little bit within a very defined, like narrow course. So that is still fear-based. It's like, well, if we let young people do what they want, um, then it's going to go awry. So we need to have very clear boundaries. So that's considered in the fear-based models. Now, trust-based models includes unschooling. It includes Sudbury schools, liberated learners and their centers, agile learning centers, free schools, Summerhill. Yeah. So all of those kind of things, and that's the trust-based models. And for that one, it's kind of goes on the political sphere of are they libertarian? Are they anarchistic? Are they social, like, leaning more towards socialism? Um, I highly recommend looking through that, especially if you like getting in the weeds, but also specifically if you have any interest in what I'm saying, just to see this graphic at the very least. Highly recommend that. So yeah, so what I was saying was my background was at a progressive school. So I didn't really, and I think most people are the same way. We don't really see anything besides the fear-based model. So when we're like, oh, school sucks, conventional school sucks, public school sucks, and we see Waldorf or we see Montessori, we're like, oh, hey, like maybe that's the answer, but it's still, and maybe it is, for your family or for right now or what have you. And that was eye-opening to me to be at a center like that. But I still didn't feel fully like validated. I didn't feel like this was the spot for children. Like if this was the best we can do, then man, we had a lot more to go. Um, Yeah, so I think a lot of people are still stuck on that fear-based um, line, that spectrum of fear-based models, and it's because they don't know anything else. It sucks. It sucks a lot, but I think that's changing, and I think that that part is awesome. So, as back to my background, as my son was also going to this school, he worked his way from like infancy, like a 6 week old, I think, that he started there, all the way through to kindergarten. And again, the kindergarten was very progressive, right? That same kind of a thing. And the teachers were great. It was really deep curriculum, meaningful, in the way that schools can make it meaningful, like a progressive school can. Uh, Also, concurrently, I was getting my teacher certification, so I was bouncing around to other schools, teaching, observing, et cetera, et cetera. And that was what was eye-opening was like the city versus the um, like suburbia, right? Schools in those two different, wildly separate areas. Um, yeah, and then I was getting my concurrently getting my master's of science in early childhood education. Um, so at that point, the school, yeah, that progressive preschool and kindergarten that my son was going to only went up to kindergarten. So my son would have to flip into first grade. We didn't have a lot of money, so it was going to be first grade public school. My son was already reading. My son was already like super interested in things, deep diving into his own interests. And then I just thought like first grade in public school, hmm. They're gonna be like trying to nail down grammar and and reading better and math and I just felt like my son was already there and what would it would just be boring for him and worst case scenario either he would become like trouble. Yeah, yeah, maybe that. Like it would just be trouble in the teacher's eyes that they couldn't keep him interested. And then learning would become unfun. Not fun anymore. Um, so that was in the back of my mind, but again, I didn't have any alternatives. Um, and then I went to the library like maybe a month and a half, a month before first grade was about to start. We were already signed up for first grade, and I found a book on unschooling, and uh, that was 7 years ago, and we've been unschooling ever since. So that's what brings me here. That is my kind of teaching background. So to get to the other questions, what has been difficult letting go of as you transition to self-directed education? What secrets do teachers hold that still apply in self-directed education? So what was difficult to let go of, especially as a teacher, especially as someone who has gone 12 years through public school, well, I guess 13, right? Because kindergarten. And then another 4 years at college, and then another 2 years at a master's degree in education, right? So if I'm really schooled at that point, if you will. Uh, a good thing for a lot of reasons, and then a bad thing for a bunch of other reasons that I guess I'll kind of get into here. What was difficult to let go of, especially as a teacher? Three things. One is visible learning, two, adultism, and that kind of top-down hierarchy, and three, like degrees and certifications as being badges of who you are, right? Representing who you are, your appearance, signaling, etc. So visible learning is the only learning. That's what we kind of learn, and we that's reinforced as a teacher and as a student that, through test taking, through worksheets, through what work did you do? Show me your homework, through presentations, essays, etc. Um, if you're just sitting there doing nothing or looking like you're doing nothing, then it's not visible and you couldn't possibly be learning. And we need to get you back on track, right? And that's literally like if there is a behavioral analysis, there's like time on task, and that on task time is definitely visible learning, right? Um, yeah, so visible learning is the only learning. And this was hard for me to break, especially because when we jumped into unschooling, like unschooling wasn't popular. This was before the pandemic. And I'm not going to say it's popular now either, but it was a lot less, a lot less like people didn't know about it. They were like, "What do you mean unschooling? What is that?" Um, so when we started unschooling, we started with a podcast, Unschooling with Kai, and we've been doing it. a little spotty, a little bit more spottily at this point, but we're still doing it. Um, but the podcast itself was, for me, one, visible because we could research things that my son was interested in and then we can present on them. And it was kind of like a book report or, a research paper, but, read aloud, if you will. Um, and my son was part of the conversation. So it was like what he was learning, but also what I was learning, right? It was visible learning. And I felt strongly compelled to prove that unschooling worked. So this was proof in a couple of ways. Like, not only is my son getting a good education, but unschooling works, and I totally believe in it. Um, and releasing that has helped us to switch kind of the format and the urgency around how we do our podcasts. Invisible learning is, and this is my number, 100% my number. I want to say it's like 90 to 95% of learning. Like, if you're not asking questions, if you're not in your young learner's mind, you don't know what's going on. Um, and oftentimes, when I feel that, like, am I doing enough or is enough getting done? Um, it's because I'm not connected with my son enough to understand what he's thinking, what he's interested in, what he's learning from this Roblox game, what's his goal and how is he taking shortcuts to get to there, all of the different strategy behind that. And what I like to say is kind of seeing through his eyes, just like intuitively understanding what he's thinking about for the most part, right? And I think the more that I can get into his invisible learning, if you will, or into his mind, the more that I'm not only connected, but then I'm like reassured that everything is working the way, that a way that I know it does, if that makes sense, right? Just a confidence booster. Um, Adultism. I think adultism is like, especially in like the hierarchy of like the top-down learning, not necessarily the fact that we're filling up, well, maybe this too, filling up kids' heads with, kids are empty vessels, and we fill them up with knowledge. And that's definitely like the teacher at the front of the classroom and the kids quietly accepting all the knowledge and skills that is being given to them, which is just a ridiculous idea. Um, but I think, again, back to like our podcast, it was that we were acquiring knowledge. Um, but I think the adultism side, what I want to speak more on is that like I was at the top. Like, even though I was like, okay, equality, equity, you know, really partnering with young people, I was still kind of deschooling this bit about adultism. I was still figuring it out. And when I started doing like intentional apologies, I started becoming more flexible. I started really being honest with myself and recognizing when my ego was getting in the way, and apologizing for that. And then, little things like journaling or like, hey, what the heck am I doing here? Or just a lot of questioning. Um, to find a new dynamic that was consent based and true partnering with my young person, right? Yeah, so adultism. The next one, degrees or certifications are necessary qualifications and speak volumes about us. And this one I'm still working on. Like you can see in my name there, it says Daniel Moeller, MSED. Huh. And I think with all things that are, well, with most things at least that are certifications or degrees, there is learning and there is skill development that is happening, and I think that's all well and good. But it's not to say that you can achieve that without that that badge, right? It's just that that's not recognized, and honestly, that's kind of like invisible, if you will. if we can point to a badge, then we can say, hey, hire me because I have this badge, or hey, trust me because I have this badge. But I don't want to be trusted because I have a badge. Um, I don't want to be trusted only because I have a badge. Let's put it that way. Um, because I think the problem with badges is that they're signaling to people that I'm a trustworthy person, that I have, the proper required or correct educational background to do XYZ. Um, and I felt that too about coaching. So like I do coaching as well. And there are coaching certificates, certifications. And it's like, I don't know. Yes and no. Like I understand people. The more people I meet and I help, the more I understand about people. Um, and sure, there are things like trauma informed, you know, certifications, which I think are like without a doubt important and not just signaling. Um, but I don't know. A coaching certificate just feels I've never done it. That's just my feel on that. But not to say I wasn't like allured by that either. Yeah, okay, so those are the things that have been difficult to let go of. Uh, Now here is the meat. Teacher knowledge that still applies. And I think this is, like I said, especially helpful because I do think that teachers are leaving the profession in droves with, with a certain amount of privilege, I'll add, as with everybody that jumps into unschooling. Sure, it is work to be here. I'm still working to be here and to maintain this lifestyle, but I think there is privilege in making that choice. Um, yeah. So, uh, back to what I was saying is that I think coming from being a teacher, teachers, the saying that I hear a lot is teachers are the canary in the coal mine. Basically, they're the first. It's kind of like the red flags, the early red flags that something isn't working. And if we see teachers leaving conventional schools in droves, then it's like, well, they're the ones that should be trusting in the system, right? They're part of the system. They're the ones that like are there not because of the pay, because they really love and care for kids. And if they're leaving, that means something's really messed up, right? Um, and I wasn't one that left per se. Like, sure, I did. I did teaching in Japan and I did teaching in the early childhood education arena. But I didn't leave like public school. However, I also made a choice not to apply to public schools because through my teacher certification program, I was just like, what's going on here is a lot of classroom management, and it's not necessarily learning. It's not necessarily science backed. It's not what I learned about learning in my master's program. It's just a bunch of other stuff that teachers do to make it work with 20 to 30 kids in a classroom. Okay, so aside from that intro, three things that I think are really important, and it's very likely if you are a homeschooling parent, or especially an unschooling parent, self-directed education parent, life learner parent, what have you. I think you might already be doing these things, but to have the words is especially important. Um, Especially when you are talking to someone of authority, especially when you're talking to family members that just don't get it, extended family, especially when someone questions what you're doing and you are feeling snarky and you want to engage, you know what I mean? Okay, so the three things are scaffolding, differentiation, zone of proximal development. And I think these all wildly apply to education anywhere. These are like specific things that teachers are taught to do. However, again, managing these or achieving these well or understanding these well with 20 to 30 kids in a classroom, sometimes a revolving, you might have 150 kids, if you're like a music teacher or something like that. Um, it's impossible. It really is. Only like micro doses here and there can you achieve any of these. Um, Scaffolding. Scaffolding, I love this term. It's just so relevant. It's so practical. It's I think I remember the definition back from my teaching days, but it's like a social process, and that social thing is important because it's relational. It's between at least two people. Um, it's a process of helping someone learn or gain skills with a little help. Okay. And I think just parents, just parents all the time do this, right? If you want your child to help cook, they're interested in cooking, they can't reach, you get them a chair. And it's kind of like this extra crutch until they're tall enough. They don't need that chair anymore. You wouldn't keep using that chair if they were tall enough. Um, if you're upset about the news, maybe you're not going to say everything that's going on. And I'm not specifically talking about censorship. I'm talking about reaching an understanding. So maybe your 3-year-old is like, well, why are you crying, mommy? Or something like that. And you're like, well, there are some people that I believe are bad, and they're trying to take books away. You like books, right? Well, some books are becoming illegal in this place, or that was just a wild example. But scaffolding, I use it every day, and I don't just use this with young people. It's not a top-down thing. I use this with my wife. I use this when I'm trying to explain unschooling to people. Like even when people are like, well, what is unschooling? I'm like, well, it's a customized education. And already it's like, that's not the full answer, but that is somewhere in between that they can understand and maybe even recognize as like, oh, I like that, like personalization. I wish school had that. Um, yeah, so that's scaffolding. Differentiation. This word sounds a lot harder, and maybe it is the idea itself is a little harder. So again, all of these definitions are my own from the top of my head. So maybe they're a little off, or you have a different understanding. Feel free to share. The idea, differentiation, the idea that skills and knowledge are tiered and with personalized instruction, we can meet learners where they are. So tiered, not in like a hierarchy of more important or something like that, but as if we were trying to attempt to understand up here or reach a skill up here and we're down here, then there are steps to getting there. And for any learner, they might already be here, they might be above here, they might be down here. We have to figure out what the next step is or what the previous step is, maybe because we had misjudged them initially, that we have to like bump down a level. And then this goes hand in hand with scaffolding. It's like, well, how do I help them reach that level then? Um, okay, so differentiation. Um, I think differentiation also includes the facilitator, I'll use that word, the facilitator's skill set to see those steps and apply them in real time. So that takes like flexibility, adaptiveness, and like real-time reflection as well. Um, and so this is all based off the theory, and I want to say I want to put theory in quotes, but I think this is just truth. Learners construct their understanding. I think this is called constructivism. It's what most, if not all, teachers just base their understanding off of. Learners construct their understanding and skill based on what they already know and can do. Um, all educators, facilitators should know this. And I think that's like, again, best case scenario. With 20 to 30 kids in a classroom, it is impossible to see the whole ladder of the skill that we're trying to accomplish today. The base of not knowing or being able to do anything, and then where each child is there, and then helping them to that next step, that scaffolding. is possible, and the system itself as shooting to get 20 to 30 kids to understand the same thing at the same time, that's the part that it's like, nah, that's not gonna work. Uh-uh. So yeah, learners construct their understanding and skill based on what they already know and can do. And so they build off of what they know. Like if I understand something, then I want to like I'm not trying to learn something up here. I'm trying to learn like the next step. If I jump into taxes and I'm trying to learn something really deep about taxes and it's really over my head, that's really confusing. And I'm like, no, I just can't learn this yet. Or I got to find somewhere in between, right? Or I need someone to help scaffold this for me. So I might reach out to someone, right? Um, the other thing about differentiation, it's not just about skill. It's about its adaptation of the lesson or the learning or the environment, the materials. It all sounds really schoolish, but it's the adaptation to unique needs, neurotype, interests, background, and hopefully all of those, etc., many more, right? Um, yeah, I think background like wraps up most of those. Like when okay, very a school scenario when a student comes in and just doesn't want to learn, like what happened that morning? So that their background changed because they were upset that their dad yelled at them. And so if you don't know that, and if you don't, address that first, then the learning isn't going to be happening after that because something is more important right now. There's an emergent thing happening. Um, and you need to know that, right? So again, that's differentiation, finding kind of the best level and best way to provide whatever it is that you're doing, the resource, the environment, the lesson, etc. Okay, last one, zone of proximal development. And again, these all wrap together really nicely. And I'm making a circle, not purposely, but this is a circular thing. Zone of proximal development or ZPD. In the middle, you have boredom. That is where kids are sometimes. They just have nothing to do or nothing's interesting. Or what you're giving them is boring, right? Because it's not interesting or not challenging, right? Then you have like kind of good, this is a bigger ring on the outside, and this is the zone of proximal development. It's good, it's interesting, it's appropriately challenging. And that's like kind of that flow zone, that flow state of like, hey, we can do stuff and this is good for me, right? And then you have outside of that, and that is too hard and it's frustrating. Uh, and I mentioned this in learning, but this is in anything, the ZPD. Um, yeah, boredom versus good, interesting, appropriate challenge versus frustration. And like if we think of ZPD in terms of reading, uh, if it's really interesting content, then your zone of proximal development expands. And maybe like a harder text, like a 400-page book for your 10-year-old becomes more accessible. And they're like, well, I actually kind of want to dig into this, even though I didn't want to read that 30-page book that you were trying to get me to read yesterday. This one is on the immune system, and I am so interested in that. So it's not like a set thing, it changes over time, changes with the content, the interests, and many other reasons as well. Yeah, so those are the takeaways. At least if these are not new ideas for you, at least maybe the terms themselves, scaffolding, differentiation, zone of proximal development can help you and give you like a little leg up and be like, look, this is differentiation. We're doing it at home. It's customized. We're using scaffolding. We're staying in my daughter's zone of proximal development. This is all the things that they're trying to achieve at school and aren't, and we can do it at home because we only have 3 or 2 kids here. Um, so that's why, Grandma, Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, feedback on this, and hope to see you all next week. All right, see you all.